Hello and welcome to Brilliant Talks by Signia UK in Ireland, the new podcast where we explore the real stories, ideas and innovation shaping hearing care today. I'm Mia Amps, Business Development Manager at WSA UK, and today we're going to have a conversation about something that sits right at the heart of hearing care, but is still too often left unsaid: hearing loss stigma. The word stigma can mean a lot of different things. It can mean silence, it can mean avoidance, it can mean the effort of pretending everything is fine when it's not. It can mean the gap between knowing something is wrong and actually feeling able to act on it. And for many people, that gap is where the real challenge begins. Before we get into the lived experience and psychology, I want to ground this in the data, because so much of what we're seeing in clinic, in families, in workplaces, in everyday conversations is reflected in the latest Eurotrack research. Now, what makes it so useful is the scale. The UK Eurotrack wave has included more than 1,300 hearing impaired respondents, and the wider reports are built from large country-level samples that typically run into the thousands. That means we're not talking about a few anecdotes or just a small clinic sample. We're talking about a robust, repeated evidence base that helps us spot patterns over time. And to explore that, I'm joined by three brilliant guests. First, Dec McLaughlin, co-founder of Auzi. Auzi's own story describes how, on his birthday in 2024, his partner Daniela created a custom hearing aid cover that turned something he had seen as purely medical into something more beautiful, personal and empowering. And I'm delighted to share that we're joined by Daniela Groza, co-founder of Auzi too. Jewellery designer and GIA graduate gemologist, Auzi's own story describes Daniela as bringing 14 years of jewellery experience into the business, and says that her background goes back to childhood jewellery classes and later formal study in jewellery and silversmithing at Edinburgh College of Art. Auzi presents itself as a proudly deaf-owned and as a family business driven by the idea that hearing aids should be worn with pride rather than hidden. And finally, Simon Houghton, psychologist, consultant, and founder of Unseen Aware. Simon's background includes 25 years of experience in psychology, behaviour, and culture change. He's also founded deaf and hidden disability awareness movements, including We Support Deaf Awareness and Unseen Aware, with the aim of helping organisations and communities engage more confidently and more thoughtfully with hidden disabilities. It's such a pleasure to have you all here. Thank you so much. So Dec, Daniela, Simon, welcome. I'd like to start with a bit of context on each of you, because I think your different perspectives are exactly what makes this conversation so interesting. Now, Dec, your story is not one of someone who discovered hearing loss later in life and then had to adjust. You've lived with hearing loss since childhood, and your own story with Auzi shows how long the emotional side of that journey can last, from adapting as a child to not feeling proud of hearing aids, arguably, and to later finding a way to wear them with confidence. So that's a really important perspective, reminds us of that psychological story that can run alongside the practical one for years. Daniela, your background is interesting because this is not simply a business story, it's also a design story. You have jewellery training, a gemology background, and a long interest in creating pieces with meaning. Auzi's own materials describe the brand as transforming assistive devices into jewellery that celebrates identity with beauty and pride. And that feels like such a clear challenge to the old idea that hearing aids should be invisible. And Simon, your work is coming from a different but very complementary angle. You've spent years looking at behaviour, culture and inclusion, and you've also lived the reality of being deaf, relying on hearing aids and lip reading. Unseen Aware, from what I've seen, is about helping organisations understand what hidden disabilities feel like in real life and how small changes in language, culture and confidence can make a big difference. So we have lived experience, design and psychology all in one room, which feels like exactly the right mix. Dec, I'd love to start with you. What's the most subtle form of stigma that you've experienced?
Yeah, one thing that comes to mind is people not wanting to ask about it. So often you'll see, and love to hear your thoughts on this, Simon, people notice your hearing aids. So of course, before my covers, I think you can see people looking at them. They maybe don't notice that you can see that. And I think the fact that people are almost shy to ask about it, I think reinforces it. You know, for instance, and obviously it's a very different journey than glasses, of course, but it's something that people would never hesitate to ask about. And I think when people sometimes do ask about it, I think they often, from my experience, like growing up and even recently, they'll almost be kind of tiptoeing around the subject. It's almost as if they're not really sure what to say. They're kind of worried if they'll offend you. It's almost like it's reinforcing the stigma element from that as well.
So I think it's such an interesting point, because it's sort of that silence around, you know, looking but not addressing, may look like politeness from the outside. You know, I think it's just that uncertainty of addressing it. But obviously that can feel very different from the inside. So when people perhaps look but not ask, does that make you feel more visible or more isolated?
Probably more isolated. I think, to me, and I'm remembering growing up at school and even into adulthood, I think to me it reinforces the fact that you're different, and maybe not necessarily in a good way. And I think that can be really challenging, because I see it as basically a reinforcing cycle where myself, I would feel like it was something I didn't want people to see. And then when people noticed it, they, in my mind, would reinforce that, which is they wouldn't know what to say or to ask about. And for me, that would be even more isolating.
So I want to pivot to Simon.
Sure.
So when someone carries something like hearing loss quietly for years, because perhaps, you know, like we were sort of thinking about, okay, hearing loss that happens, whether it's gradually or at a later stage in life, if someone perhaps isn't taking action, you know, soon, so if someone was to carry that hearing loss sort of silently or hidden for years, what could that do, and what does that do to the way that someone sees themselves?
Yeah, it's interesting, because some people say that hearing loss is hidden, and others say it's not hidden because you've got hearing aids. But if you actually look at the traditional colour of hearing aids, they're kind of skin colour. So it's trying to create that sense of blending in with your skull, if you like. And obviously, if you've got hair, you can. If you've got more hair than me, anyway, you can pretend that you can cover it. So people can go through long periods without acknowledging that they have a hearing loss, and that can be damaging long term, because it impacts your self-identity, it impacts your esteem, your self-esteem, because the issue is it's almost like there's no way to have a conversation about it. You said earlier about people sort of, not to use the same word, but pussyfooting around, should I say something? Or I'll be embarrassed to say something if I don't want to offend somebody. But you don't come to that meeting of mind, because if you do have a conversation, you can actually do something to help. You can create those small adjustments, which is just to let you know, I lip read, so as long as I can see you, I should be all right. Or it's really bright behind you, so let's close the curtains so that I'll be able to see your face. Things like that. But what happens is it's kind of the never said. And that has a detriment over time. It has a real issue for people who are like, they start to feel like, not that they don't matter, but that it can have a longer term impact. And it's something that needs to be read. And that's one of the reasons why you have an Unseen Aware, because it allows people to say, there's an ally. Because you don't know who is an ally and who isn't. So once you know who's an ally, you can have that conversation. And then, and I don't know about you, but, you know, Dec, what I've found is when you've had a conversation with someone and they come to you with a sense of curiosity, the person who has a disability is more than happy to talk about their challenges. more than happy to say, this is what's great, this is why it happened. And then everyone goes away with more information. But it's this kind of sense of, I don't know what to say. I don't want to offend anybody. So what I'll do, and in the psychology, it's basically fight or flight. You're basically going, this is mildly terrorizing. So, and I want predictability. That we live through having consistency and predictability. We're looking for the saber-toothed tiger when we were cavemen. It's all about getting our food. It's about doing the same thing over and over again, keeping ourselves alive. All of a sudden, there's a situation which is stressful. And the fight or flight for a lot of people is just ignore. Don't say anything and just ignore that it's there, and we'll just carry on with our day. And that then reiterates this real challenge with somebody feeling like I don't matter. They're not acknowledging my challenge, and my self-esteem is hit. As over time, my self-esteem is hit.
I think that's so interesting that you sort of trace those sort of social behaviours and interactions all the way back to
caveman.
Amazing. I think, again, linking back to the Eurotrack data, the survey, is hearing aid use is not only about whether someone owns a device. I have loads of patients who have said, oh yeah, I got hearing aids donkeys years ago, they've sat in my drawer. Right, okay. It's also about whether they accept it as part of their everyday life. And again, could be for one of many reasons, whether it's that social stigma side of it, whether it's sort of a tricky rehabilitation journey, could be from different aspects. So the report is showing that not all hearing aid owners wear their devices consistently. And I think that tells us that acceptance is sometimes a slower journey than actual acquisition. And so for dispensers listening, this is where it becomes really useful to ask not only what is the hearing threshold, but also how does that patient feel about being seen with those devices? And I think that second question can uncover a great deal about readiness, identity, and also possible resistance along the way as well. So reflecting on a part of that data, so Eurotrack's route to hearing aid data also supports that in the broader picture. So the latest UK report, 70% of hearing impaired respondents discussed their hearing loss with an ENT doctor or family doctor, and 58% got hearing aids recommended by that doctor. But that still leaves a significant proportion who do not progress along that pathway, which suggests that there are emotional, practical and social drop-offs at many stages. And I'd like to turn to Daniela. When people come to Auzi, are they usually already comfortable with hearing aid visibility, or is the act of designing, customization of a case sometimes the thing that helps them get there?
It's both, actually. So some are already proud and they want to make it more obvious through wearing our jewelry, but there are also as many that say, oh, like I haven't worn my hearing aids in ages, but this would make me wear them. Or people who've said, oh, I've been postponing getting hearing aids, but now that I found you, I'm gonna go get one. So there have been quite a few customers who were like, I'm getting my hearing aids in 2 weeks. I'm so excited now because I found you guys. So yeah.
I think it's so powerful, and there's so many people that I can think that I've come across in clinic who, if I sort of could direct them to say, actually, yes, we've got multiple different sort of designs and styles you can go from, but sometimes people are looking for that edge, and that I think that customization. So it really, almost as if they're taking their hearing into their own hands in terms of their owning it. This is me. I'm bringing out my own personality in it. Just sort of taking it back to the social realm and the social aspect. I'd like to ask Dec, what do hearing people say, or you've experienced hearing people say, that they think is perhaps supportive but isn't?
Yeah, there's certainly a few things that come to mind. I think, I think there's times where they may be... Actually, one thing that's come up a lot recently is, well, maybe not recently with my covers, but actually to an extent, which is a lot of people saying, oh, I never knew you wore hearing aids. And it's never, from a negative place, of course. But I think that, again, just reinforces the fact that it's hidden and like people never noticed. And obviously for me, it's, a much better place now in terms of how I relate to it. But sometimes there's a thought, which is, will they think differently of me now? As in, they never thought I had it, or they never knew I had it before. So that's one that comes up quite a lot. There are times, and again, I don't think anyone's trying to be not inclusive, but if you're in a noisy place or you need to ask somebody to repeat something a few times, I think people mean good by it, but often you can feel, well, maybe I'm not part of this conversation, which is, oh, it doesn't matter, it's fine, don't worry about it, or you didn't miss anything. That sort of stuff I think can be quite unhelpful, really. Those are the ones that come to mind. Neither can be helpful.
Obviously, it's that dismissing part of it, isn't it? Thinking perhaps on the surface, don't worry about it. I'll tell you later. Well, no, I want to be part of this conversation. I'd like to know now. So I think it's also taking it back to clinic and thinking about, how the Eurotrack figures and survey links in. One of the things that repeatedly comes up and repeatedly surfaces is perceived need. So if a person's experience is continually softened or minimised or actually reframed by other people, that person may be less likely to decide that action is necessary. Now, that doesn't affect how they feel. It affects also whether they seek help at all. Daniela, as someone supportive of Dec, do you think people sometimes underestimate the impact of comments like, oh, don't worry, tell you later, or don't worry about it?
Yeah, definitely. A lot to do with self-esteem, with then Dec going away and next time being afraid to express himself, to be himself, to ask. There's that awkwardness where maybe he sometimes mentions to someone, oh, as you can see, I wear hearing aids. They're like, oh, yeah, I know, I've noticed. But then they would never bring it up to ask, is there something you need? Is there anything we can do to make you feel more comfortable? Or there's that lack from hearing people of trying to make deaf people comfortable.
I think it's sort of that people from the hearing world perhaps don't recognise the weight or the impact of those comments, and for so many things that can be just taken for granted sort of day to day. But I think it starts at that acknowledgement, right? It starts at that, even like taking an interest. I'm sure it's not something that you two would perhaps be offended by if people were sort of genuinely curious and wanting to understand a bit more, to make sure that they are helping, like you mentioned, sort of asking, is there a way that I can make this a more comfortable experience for you? You mentioned about allies quite a lot. It's one of those, again, it's such an important point. I think the sort of the rehabilitation side of it, the follow-up side of it can get overlooked in terms of how crucial that is. So dispensers, audiologists, clinicians have got such a responsibility actually in terms of being that person that's there at that initial consultation, listening to the concerns. I think it's almost an opportunity to perhaps reframe the question of, do you want to try hearing aids? Especially for a new wearer, someone who's not familiar, what will that look like? Instead, could we ask questions like, okay, well, what would make this manageable for you? Or how are we able to open the door to talk about other topics, whether it is how they're getting on at home with significant others, or finding out what's important. You mentioned about, for different people, actually different things are important.
What are you worried about?
Exactly. And it's sort of bringing it back to that lived experience of social life, work life, confidence. So maybe it's a case of actually breaking things down into stages, rather than not having this massive weight. Exactly. And again, everyone's at a different stage, and everyone's journey is valid. So, Daniela, where did the idea for Auzi come from? Where did that start?
Yeah, it's been a very personal journey. Of course, it all started with Dec. We actually met at university in 2019, and we've been partners ever since. And throughout time, like, he often shared the stigma fell. When I initially met him, he was only wearing one hearing aid when he needed two. He shared all of that. He would just alternate them. Some days he would wear the left one, other days the right one. Yeah, and yeah, like, because my background is jewelry design, and I'd made little gifts for him, as he mentioned before, like rings, pendants, different things. He one day was like, "Oh, do you think you could make something for my hearing aid?" And I worked on it for a while, like many months, like almost a year. And then in February 2024, for his birthday, I made the first one.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
So was it the origin of that? Was it more for the idea of self-expression, or was it more for the idea of challenging stigma?
It was both. It was, he wanted it to match his style. I think that's one of the things he said. Yeah, to just make them kind of feel more personal. Yeah.
Did it make you wear two hearing aids?
It genuinely did.
Yeah.
Genuinely.
You've gone from one to two.
Yeah, 100%.
The same with our glasses, right?
Yeah.
We, you know,
We take enough time choosing, don't we?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, I end up walking around the opticians with probably 5 or 6 frames in my hand, sort of, you know, really taking that time to think about it. So why would we not want to give that sort of experience and that, again, self-identity?
And it's
when we're sort of trying to dismantle the idea of stigma and also the idea of shame of someone with a hearing loss who's perhaps very conscious of others' views on them, is there a way that we can sort of get around that shame aspect of it?
I think it's hard. There's a social element to it, and then there's a kind of self shame. I think that the social element is it's external. So people are challenging you. Maybe there's instances where it can be inconsistent as well with external, because how you interact with an inconsiderate boss or colleague compared to being at a party where it's different environmental cues there, compared to self-identity and it's a shame of an individual, yourself, because you've had this whole life up to that point where you have struggled like no one has struggled, but no one has seen it. And that shame is like, well, actually, maybe there's something in this fact that I'm not able to do this, or I'm not good enough, or maybe the deafness is one thing, but maybe I am stupid. And just to use an analogy, you know, it's not using deafness per se, but ADHD has been relatively new in terms of a diagnosis. But as long as I was at school, there were certain children who were constantly being told they were naughty, constantly being told to sit down, constantly running around, constantly doing things that they shouldn't have been doing. They probably have ADHD, but we didn't know that. But you imagine being told to sit down or to be quiet or to say that you're not going to amount to anything 20, 30, 40,000 times at school. What impact will that have on you as your identity? So your identity is, I'm naughty, I can't sit still, I'll never amount to anything. And that is just, if you imagine, it's just building up layers and layers and layers, which is why when we, to full circle at the beginning, when we said if somebody wants to talk about it, then why are some people dismissive of that help? It's because it's just so ingrained in who we are. And it is shameful. And we don't want, and it goes back to wanting to fit in. And I was this is weird, it's come from different angles, but not wanting to stand out, because you just want to be part of, why should we be any different? We want to just have a a good time at school, a good time at college, a good time at university, and not to feel like we're getting special treatment or that we need special treatment. But that shame that we carry is significant. And I can certainly say there are certain behaviours, going back to this thing that we said about, not asking many times, that's one example, where if I didn't have that shame, I would be like, yeah, repeat.
I think it's a really interesting one. I think we're now starting to see a little bit more in terms of sort of like pop culture and social media. We're actually seeing more role models.
Yes.
Who, carry their hearing loss as part of their identity.
Yeah.
One thing that comes to mind is the show Love Island.
Oh, right, yes.
No,
yeah.
watch them. And they had their first deaf contestant, Tasha Gori.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think it's people, I remember sort of seeing the narrative around it was just like, oh my gosh, you would have never known. But again, it's that common. It's just like, okay, we understand why you're saying that. But I think, if we're able to allow more people to have that pride and, want to, if they want to show off that side of them. And I think, with a brand like Auzi, making more of a show of it. And if people want to, right? If people want to sort of take that as part of their self-identity. So, the more people see hearing aids as ordinary, visible, acceptable, there's perhaps less space for shame to grow.
Yes.
And so for dispensers, I think that could mean conversation not just stopping at audiology outcomes. Let's have more conversations about self-image. Let's have more conversations about confidence, work life, social life, family life, and really sort of drawing that conversation and targeting it to those areas that individual may find that stigma sits in. Again, it's different for everyone. So, Daniela, I want to bring the partner perspective in a bit more directly now, because I think it's so important. Obviously, we've heard now you designed the first hearing aid cover for Dec, and you were close enough to see that emotional shift that it made. What did you notice in him when the hearing aid stopped feeling like something to hide?
Yeah, he became even more, outgoing, confident. Like I could just see it in his eyes. His face just lit up when he wore them for the first time, and he was so excited and was like, wow, like I really want other people to have this as well, and maybe we can help more people around the world.
Awesome. So, Dec, with sort of hearing that impact that in your own journey, in your own story, for dispensers, what do you think is one of the most helpful or some helpful tips to know about the role of a significant other when someone's navigating those barriers?
Yeah, 100%. I think one of the biggest things is definitely communication. I think in any relationship probably. But yeah, I think that the significant other plays such a huge role. And I think, someone to Simon's point earlier, often they can be the ones bringing somebody in. So that's, a huge thing. And yeah, I think having their support is really important. Maybe there's an educational element as well for the significant other. Obviously in that sense, it's more about being there for somebody who's going through the journey. And yeah, I think as well, maybe being somebody who, if you can teach them maybe the right ways to talk about hearing loss, because as you mentioned with all the statistics, even if somebody gets a hearing device, they might not wear it. And I do think that a significant other who, in many respects, shows that they don't see them differently, all these things, I think can have a huge impact. And yeah, I think as well, because maybe for somebody directly it's really difficult and maybe they're more reluctant, having their significant other, if done well, can really encourage them. So maybe even if they come in, maybe if they have their first appointment, maybe they don't want to come back, I think being able to almost have a session or time with the significant other could be a really important move. I think that can have a big impact.
And I think it can be quite easy to overlook or underestimate, how much of an impact that significant others have. One of the things that we often ask as dispensers in clinic is, okay, well, do you live alone? Do you live with anyone? Again, is it a case of sort of perhaps reframing that question more along the lines of who in your life is part of this decision? I often hear when I sort of speak to audiologists and other clinicians, I love the term of a hearing partner, bringing a hearing partner along to the consultation, to that, because I say, excuse the pun, it's like having another set of ears for that information to hit on as well. Because I'm sure you guys, relate to it in terms of audiology appointments, consultations, whatever it is, can be quite weighty. There can be quite a lot of information going around, whether it's talking through hearing results, quite a lot. And, 9 times out of 10, you walk out that appointment thinking, what did they say? Exactly. So I think practically having someone part of that journey, but also, just having someone there who is going to be involved at every stage, follow-ups and beyond. So important, someone feeling understood, valued, and just helping those conversations perhaps be easier. So Dec and Daniela, if you could change one thing about how the UK public views hearing aids, what would that be? If you can put it down to one thing.
Yeah, it's really hard to put it down to one. I think we kind of covered this earlier from what I picked up, something that Simon said, which is, maybe it's just me or my perception of it. I feel like hearing loss, the way people speak about it feels very binary. So either you can hear or you're deaf. And to your point, Simon, obviously it was, I guess, more about different experiences. But one thing that I think is really interesting is it is a spectrum in terms of hearing. Obviously, you've got the audiogram, if that's the right word. That obviously proves that point. And what I think is really curious is, again, we've touched on glasses very briefly. One thing I would love to have happen, and it will probably take years and lots of effort, is for hearing to be seen in the same way or similar to glasses, and maybe specifically in the sense that, I'm sure you guys get your eyes tested frequently. I don't know how it works. I never wear glasses, but, when you go in to get your eyes tested, rather, there's a sense of, you might be 20/20 or 5/20. I actually you can tell I don't know the glasses continuum, but I guess what I'm trying to say there is it feels like there's a real acceptance of the fact that some people are long-sighted or short-sighted, and that's how it is. Yeah,
there's a lot us and the hearing aid industry in general can do to spread more knowledge about the many facets of hearing loss out there, and to just inform the public of how they can to understand better. Yeah.
And it's a great point. Again, it's coming around to that that experience of going through an audiology clinic and that patient journey, of it almost feeling maybe like a force in terms of I have to do this, rather than I'm choosing to go and see an audiologist. And Dec, do you think that hearing aids perhaps become easier to accept when they stop being something that's sort of hidden or forced and is actually something that's being chosen? Yeah,
I'd say so, definitely. And I actually want to come back to the role models part you mentioned earlier, because what I think I'd certainly love to see, and hopefully does happen over time, is you have all these, I don't want to say micro, because they're not celebrities and, everyday people, but let's say role models out there where, let's say like you're on the street or like on the bus or something, and you see somebody with like a really cool set of hearing aids, different colors, all these things, and like really proudly showing it. I think the more you see of that, it gets more normalized, which I think can be really powerful. And I guess like I was saying earlier, like I completely understand why there's been over time a push towards smaller devices and invisible as a selling point. I totally get it. Makes perfect sense. Or, flesh-coloured, like we spoke about. I really understand it. But I think for me, what can be the counterbalance, maybe not so in a not so good way, is it reinforces it. And I think one thing that I'm really curious about is somebody who's coming in to get hearing aids later in life, if the first thing you see when you look for a device is, like, as a selling point, they're the smallest ones or they're invisible. I mean, you're probably have a better view on this than me in terms of psychology, but I'm just curious about how much of a reinforcing thing that is. It's like, okay, so if I'm getting hearing aids, they need to be small. Okay, so people want invisible ones. I wonder if there's a self-conscious thing there. So I guess if we can like we said quite a lot today, like if people want the option, everyone's different, everyone's got a different journey.
Yeah.
I think the messaging behind hearing aids is so important. Like, I feel like maybe it can make people really self-conscious when you are advertising them as the most invisible one, the most hidden. Maybe it actually makes people like, that's how it needs to be. You have to hide them. That's what they're for, and how it should be, and because they can be so hidden, especially with people with long hair. It's not fully accepted yet, and I mean, glasses are very visible, very out there, and we really want hearing aids to be the same, to give people this option, to make them part of who they are, to show them off like any jewelry, because why can't it be an accessory?
Yeah.
Definitely. And I think it's sort of, again, going back to that clinic perspective, personally, I always sort of try to steer away from the word discreet, because I was not a fan of the connotations that came with it. Exactly like you said, in terms of, well, this is what I've seen advertised, this is what I want, it's breaking that narrative and sort of shifting the barrier. For some people, absolutely, discreet is important, aesthetics are important, but for some people, visibility, style, self-expression can matter so much more. So it's introducing the safest position is choice. And that could mean language like, would you prefer something that blends in, or something that feels more like you? What matters to you most? Is it sound? Is it comfort? Is it appearance? Or is it all three? How do you want to feel wearing this? Really sort of making it like a more of a holistic experience. Those are small questions, but they can completely change the emotional tone of the conversation.
Mia, is it okay if we flip it back to you now with some questions?
Sure, go for it.
Signia has leaned into style a lot recently. Is that a deliberate anti-stigma move?
Absolutely. One of the devices, one of the styles that is really sort of stepping up to the mark with stigma busting is our Stiletto IX. And this was a really sort of deliberate move in terms of taking the sort of conventional idea of a hearing aid and flipping it on its head. So yeah, with your Stiletto, slim design, and also a really great option for glasses wearers, with the way that it is narrower, sort of takes up less space around at the back of the ear. But also the colour choices in the Stiletto were also deliberate, in terms of we've decided to stay away from more of the sort of classic neutrals like your beiges, the browns that we were speaking about earlier, and instead we've sort of gone for more of the dual tone. So the one I've got here is the black and the silver. My personal favourite is the snow white and rose gold. Absolutely beautiful. So yeah, just a modern take on a classic design, really. So yeah, another step towards moving away from perhaps a preconception of what a hearing aid is for people.
Fantastic. I love those. They're actually amazing. And I guess in the opposite sense, do you think that more discreet designs can still be important in tackling stigma?
100%. I think going back to obviously what we discussed, just a moment ago about actually for some people, yes, it's a really, really important factor. One of the options that we have, again, sort of style wise, for more of a smaller device is the Silk. So the Silk IX is probably the smallest device that we do. And the whole idea of this is more designed for those mild to moderate hearing loss patients. And if anything, it can be that stepping stone for people who are exploring hearing aids for the first time, who are perhaps in those earlier stages of their hearing journey. And if it's that difference between someone taking that step for a device that is on the smaller side, if that aesthetics is still, at the top of the priority list for them, that's the difference between them taking up an option and not. That's exactly where the Silk comes into it.
I've got a question. Does sound quality impact stigma?
100%. I think it absolutely does. If someone is having an experience with a suboptimal sound quality and experience, I think that can be just as sort of damaging to confidence as, you know, someone who is really passionate about the aesthetics of a device. If that sound performance and hearing aid performance overall isn't hitting the mark for them, you know, that could lead to sort of, you know, not less uptake with hearing aids in general. So yeah, having confidence in the device aesthetically, but also having confidence in the device performatively, processing wise, what the aids actually delivering sound wise. You know, great example of that again on the Signia platform on IX is our real-time conversation enhancer, and essentially that gives us the power to track multiple conversation partners without having to rely on the user to turn their head in a group scenario. So really giving that power in those more challenging environments like conversations in noise, you know, groups in noise, which again, coming back to the Eurotrack surveys and studies, year after year, that challenging scenario always comes at the top of where hearing aid wearers find the most difficult. So bringing back that power of sound processing, giving people that performance in those challenging environments, just that step closer to, again, maintaining social involvement with users, and again empowering users in that regard as well. Okay guys, so this has been such an insightful conversation. If there's one takeaway, I think it's this: hearing loss is not just a clinical issue, it's emotional, it's psychological, and it's also deeply personal. And I think if we want to reduce stigma, we need to understand the barriers, not just the technology. And if you want to learn more about the recent Eurotrack survey, if you go to ehima.com, that's EHIMA.com, and to find out more about Signia hearing products, head over to signia-pro.com. A huge thank you to our guests today. You can find out more about Simon and Unseen Aware by visiting unseenaware.com or by searching Kindness Crew online. And thank you to Dec and Daniela from Auzi. Definitely worth checking out their website, myauzi.com, and their Instagram account at auzi.me. I think that's the same handle across your socials, guys. Yeah. And finally, thank you for listening to Brilliant Talks by Signia UK and Ireland. We'll see you next time.